This is the 14th problem that we are supposed to solve. A limited company went into voluntary liquidation with the following liabilities: trade creditors 12,000, BOD 20,000, capitals. There are two types of capitals: preference share capital and ordinary share capital. Ordinary share capital can also be called as equity share capital. So we have 10,000 preference shares of rupees 10 each, 7 called up. So only 7 rupee is called up, 3 rupee is uncalled capital. 10,000 ordinary share of rupees 10 each, rupees 9 called up, 90,000. Ordinary share is also called as equity share capital. So out of 10 rupee face value, 9 rupee is called. In that we have calls in arrears 2000. Few shareholders have failed to pay some amount of call money. So calls in arrears means when a shareholder fails to pay the call money is called calls in arrears. So out of 90,000, 2,000 is not paid by shareholder. So actual paid up capital is 88,000. Cash received in anticipation of calls. I repeat, cash received in anticipation of calls. It's called calls in advance. Total calls in advance is 28,000. In 28,000, 24,000 is calls in advance for preference share and 4,000 is a calls in advance for equity share. As explained you before, ordinary share is also called as equity share. So preference share calls in advance is 24,000. Ordinary share calls in advance is 4,000. The assets realized rupees 2 lakh. Expenses of liquidation amounted to rupee 2,000 and liquidator remuneration was 3,000. Prepare liquidator final statement of accounts. Now let me explain in depth. Trade creditors and BOD 12,000 and 20,000 together you get 32,000. This is called unsecured creditors. So total unsecured creditors is 32,000. Then we have two types of capital. We have preference share capital of rupees 10 each, 7 called up, we get 70,000. So 10,000 ordinary shares of rupees 10 each, 9 called up, so you get 90,000. That's 10,000 into 9, you get 90,000. And in that few shareholders have not paid the call money, 2,000. So actual paid up capital is 88,000. So we assume that calls in arrears is recovered during liquidation. So 2,000 rupee calls in advance has been received. So we assume that calls in arrears is being received. Then we have calls in advance. Preference share calls in advance is 24,000. Ordinary share calls in advance is 4,000. Total calls in advance is 28,000. Total assets realized, all assets sold is 2 lakh and liquidation expenses is 2,000 and liquidator remuneration is 3,000. I repeat, liquidator remuneration fixed is 3,000. No need to calculate any liquidator remuneration. Prepare liquidator final statement of accounts. Now let us look into the solution. So here we have assets realized 2 lakhs and then we have calls in arrears received 2,000. We assume that calls in arrears has been received at the time of liquidation. So total recovery, total receipts is 2 lakh 2,000. What are the different payments? Payment number 1, secured creditor we don't have in our question, so dash. Liquidation expenses 2000. Liquidator remuneration is 3000 fixed. It's not calculated on assets or on liability. So fixed remuneration is 3000. Next, debenture dash, we don't have any debenture in our question. Then unsecured creditor is 32,000. That's trade creditors and BOD together. It's 32,000. Then we have calls in advance. So we have two calls in advance. Preference share calls in advance 24,000. Ordinary share calls in advance, it's 4,000. And then after payment of calls in advance, next order of payment, next step in preference is capital. So we need to pay preference share capital 70,000 and stop here. And the last payment we need to make it to equity share. How to pay equity share? Let us calculate amount available to ordinary share capital. So we get debit side 2,02,000 minus liquidation expenses 2000 minus liquidator remuneration 3000 minus unsecured creditor 32,000 minus calls in advance preference share 24,000 minus ordinary share calls in advance 4,000 minus preference share capital 70,000. So leftover amount is 67,000. Actually we need to pay 90,000, but we could not pay 90,000. We don't have that much of amount. We don't have that much of cash. So in place of 90,000 equity share, we pay only 67,000. So 67,000 divided by 10,000 share, we pay 6 rupee 70 paisa per share. Actual paid up share is 9 rupee. Where we need to pay 9 rupee, we just to pay 6 rupee 70 paisa, then 1 rupee 30 paisa difference is a loss to the equity shareholder. How do you get 1 rupee 30 paisa? Paid up capital is 9 rupee minus 6 rupee 70 paisa. We get 1 rupee 30 paisa is a loss to the shareholders. Thank you.